Bad news, you guys, season 1 of Legion is over, and we were left with an orb full of David and mystery. The good news is, we're not done talking about Legion because it was our favorite show of the year. And if you feel the same way, hit the subscribe button. It makes total sense. Because I love you guys and Legion so much, I rewatched all of season 1 and found every single pop culture reference in the show. Well, maybe just the biggest pop culture references that I could find before my brain stopped working.
Maybe he ate yogurt. Like a creamy... Or what's he on, you think? Klonopin? Yeah, Klonopin. Or hold the phone, yogurt and Klonopin.
Let's start with the most obvious, Stanley Kubrick. It's right there in the name, Clockwork's Psychiatric Hospital, as well as David's entire treatment that mirrors Alex's rehabilitation, and even the wardrobe and costuming feels influenced by A Clockwork Orange. The composition and colors of Legion pull from Kubrick's other classics, The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey. When we meet Oliver in his ice-cold digs, we can't help but be reminded of 2001's classic scene. Throughout the series, the audience isn't supposed to know when or where Legion takes place, to illustrate exactly what's going on in David's mind. By using a myriad of storytelling devices to reflect David's own psychology, Noah Hawley is channeling his inner Kubrick. Another filmmaker with influence here is Wes Anderson. Even Clockworks looks like it could have been designed by Anderson. And how about that Bollywood-inspired dance number during episode 1? As we've seen with Anderson's own films, Legion mixed up aspect ratios in order to jump to different timelines, perspectives, and in David's case, memories. Throw in some familiar-looking tracksuits and homemade beanies, and you have some awesome allusions to Anderson.
Either they can't hear us or they don't understand.
We couldn't just sit here and forget about David Lynch, mastermind of some of the most messed up moments in TV and film. The Devil with Yellow Eyes gave us flashbacks to the scariest hobo cameo in film ever. The big DYE also reminded us of Demonic Bob from Twin Peaks. Killer Bob even possessed human hosts like a parasite. Sounds like our fat friend in Legion. Also, the floor in Ptolemy's memory of his mother is the exact same floor from the trippy dream sequence with the backward-speaking dwarf. Did you think that oozing blood wall wart was gross? Yeah, me too. Well, it's a tamed-down version of David Cronenberg's body horror work. That includes Videodrome's inanimate objects with exploding body parts, the parasitic horror of Shivers, also known as Orgy of the Blood Parasites, the Brood story of a powerful telepath, and finally Scanners that features psychics, mind control, and someone who's tormented by the voices in his head. Sounds like Legion. Alright, so those are some of the big-name filmmakers that we found in Legion's DNA, but there are dozens and dozens of other influences. As early as the first episode, it's pretty clear that Pink Floyd has a significant impact over Legion, and that makes perfect sense for a show about a mutant with schizophrenia. David's romantic interest in the show, Syd Barrett, is an obvious nod to the band's original lead singer, and Dark Side of the Moon permeates throughout the show. That album explored Barrett's declining mental state in the early 1970s, and it fits perfectly as Legion's soundtrack of mental illness. Oh, and a fun fact, Legion composer Jeff Russo even went out and bought the same exact synthesizer that the band used on that album. Moving on, David's kitchen freakout was an exercise in spectacular special effects, and it even has a similarly homey feel as the whirlwind of household items flying around in Poltergeist. During David's escape from Division 3 in episode 1, he submerges himself in a pool, and all hell breaks loose. David pops up from the water to find his friends there to save him. The conclusion of Let the Right One In finds us in a pretty similar situation, but with a vampire instead of a mutant. I know you guys out there were big fans of Lenny's Nina Simone-driven dance sequence, and I couldn't help but be reminded of an opening title sequence to a James Bond flick, or even the instant classic dance-off in Ex Machina. So what year does Legion take place? The future, the past?
Where are we again?
With a portion of the story set in a mental hospital and time jumping all over the place, it feels very 12 Monkeys.
Right. Right.
Since we're on the topic of Brad Pitt, how about a little bit of Fight Club? The narrator has Tyler Durden and David has Lenny. Sprinkle in some Mr. Robot, who's a figment of Elliot's imagination. Just like in David's case, the audience quickly concludes that these protagonists are unreliable narrators due to the mental illnesses that they suffer from.
Was I like 8? How is it? Are we inside my head?
The significance of memories and the quest to control them is an important theme throughout the show. We saw a similar approach to memory in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. They both deal with exploring, deleting, or rewriting past memories. Heck, there are even devices in each that can control the mind's power over memories. The process of memory work and Ptolemy's ability as a memory artist to walk around inside of them also reminds me of the dream work in Christopher Nolan's Inception. Plus, that kitchen scene.
Freeze.
So I was right.
Forget about alternate realities, how about altered states? The 1980s sci-fi film shared the horrors that experimental treatments and hallucinogenic drugs had on one's mental and physical state. We see moments of this when David is prodded and probed under examination and crammed into claustrophobic spaces while his mind runs wild in another reality. Of course, the stylized surrealism of Legion isn't anything new to TV. You can also find it in the short-lived 1960s series The Prisoner. That show wrestled with similar themes, such as personal identity, psychology, and the power of the mind, all of which were wrapped up in a groovy, retro-futuristic package. Yeah, what about the Shadow King's creepy giant eyes that we saw spying on our heroes? Well, Hitchcock did that over 60 years ago in Spellbound. There's this extremely trippy dream sequence that features a similar motif, and huge eyeballs painted all over some curtains. Anyways, it's really weird, but it was designed by none other than Salvador Dali. Guys, I'm not so sure this next one was intentional, but I sure hope it was. Late into episode 5, as Melanie and Team Summerland approach David's childhood home, all sound goes out, so they're forced to briefly reenact this Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode. Okay, maybe that was a stretch, but maybe it was the Little Mermaid.
You can't speak?
Probably neither of those. We move on to episode 7, where remnants of John Carpenter's They Live can be found. In Carpenter's film, it's Roddy Piper that rocks special sunglasses to see through the aliens' illusions. In chapter 7, Sid and Carrie use some specs to shake off the Shadow King's projections and turn everything black and white. Couple that with the absence of dialogue and you have yourself a 1920s silent film full with title cards. The monster arrives, and Aubrey Plaza looks like she's pulled straight from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's bizarre, hilarious, and awesome all at the same time. Oh, and by the way, didn't those astral zombies created by the Shadow King remind you of something you would have seen in Dawn of the Dead? The only difference being, those ones were real. The climactic end to this episode showcased David's power to manipulate time and matter. Basically, he was Neo in the Matrix, just stopping bullets in midair and dropping them to the floor.
How? He is the one.
Raise your hand if you thought a reality TV show had some influence over Legion. It's true, Noah Hawley actually discussed the idea of the Shadow King with a crew member who was a huge fan of the TLC show My 600-Pound Life. Couple that with a Sigmund Freud poem that explored the idea of the uncanny, and Hawley had the perfect vessel for the fearful Shadow King that actually grew larger and larger the more he remained inside David. How about something to keep in mind for season 2? Hawley has compared Legion to none other than Breaking Bad.
I am the one who knocks.
This season, we all assume David was one of the good guys, but what if it's actually an origin story of a villain? If the comics are any indication, Legion has been on both sides of the fight. Finally, I left one of the biggest no-brainers of this entire video for the end. Legion was inspired by the X-Men comics. No shit, Ryan. Although the X-Men are never name-checked throughout the show, there are some extremely well-placed X's around our heroes. Also, Sid's powers of touch are pulled straight from Rogue. Dr. Melanie Bird's Summerland feels awfully similar to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, although her thoughts on humans going the way of dinosaurs reminds us of something we'd hear coming from Magneto's mouth. It's worth noting that executive producer Bryan Singer had a lot of influence here. He was one of the first filmmakers to capture the comic book thrills on film, having directed the original X-Men movies. He's also on record saying that Legion will tie back into the film franchises. What's up, guys? If you enjoyed this video and you love Legion like I do, please do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, and also let's continue the conversation in the comments. I know there's a ton of references out there. I only scratched the surface, so let's see how much we can find. Hit me up in the comments below.